After that introduction, I want to cry. Paul has meant so much to me. He's inspired me just as much, I think, as I've inspired him. If you've heard me lecture before, you know I like to move around, and as you can tell, my mobility is a bit limited. So it's going to be hard to talk without moving around, especially since I didn't take my Ritalin this morning. Where's Jim? Is he still here? He leave, right? Well, there you are. I want to tell you, I didn't like your presentation. And mainly I didn't like it because it was too good. And I hate a tough act to follow. And that was a very tough act to follow. Is my wife here somewhere? She didn't come either? There she is. It's funny, my wife and I are both docents at the Los Angeles Zoo. And you provided us with so much good information that we can relate. You know, we tour children once or twice a week, or I do the best I can in the condition I'm in. And there's just so much good information that's understandable, that's simple, because I know that's how your mind operates. But it's just very, very good material that we can present to the, to the children. Before I get into the basic principles of successful vision therapy, and in all modesty, I think we have probably one of the most successful practices in curing strabismics and amblyopes as anyone else has. I'd like to bring up two subjects which I think are prerequisite to successful vision therapy. And those two subjects are prescribing the spectacle correction and occlusion. Now, the basic, God, I'd like to move. The basic premise written in practically every book on strabismus therapy relative to spectacle correction is to prescribe the maximum plus lenses that you find in your quote refraction. And are the slides not working? Okay. And to correct any measurable anisometropia. We almost never do that simply because that method never works. When you're measuring the refractive error, and I hate that term. God, isn't that a terrible term? Refractive error. It's not an error. It might be a refractive condition that you're measuring with your phoropter, but the word error I hate. As did Bob Kraskin, who I'm going to introduce in a little bit. Your amblyope usually is an eccentric fixator. He's not fixating with his fovea centralis. He's fixating with an area of the retina, and therefore the line of sight is not passing through the center of the cornea. It's passing through an eccentric area of the cornea, which we all know from our contact lens fitting is flatter and more toroidal than the central part of the cornea. So what we're going to measure when we measure that is more plus because the cornea is flatter, and we're going to measure more cylinder because of the toricity of the cornea. Now, if we correct that, it's always going to remain in the patient's best interest to use that line of sight because that's where he's going to get the best acuity. And so we definitely don't want to do that. We don't want to correct the cylinder because then he's going to have the cylinder in his lenses which is going to cause a blur if we correct it. So we must be aware that the patient is not looking through the optic axis of that eye. Now, it will always remain in that patient's best interest to look through this peripheral portion of the cornea if we correct the refractive condition that way. We're also going to find more plus in one eye. Therefore, we're going to find some anisoconia. And one image is going to be larger than the other image if we fixate through that, and we prescribe those differences in lenses. And it's going to be very hard to create any binocularity. So my usual method of prescribing is to reduce the plus that I find in the normally fixating eye by about a half to 1 diopter, and to make both lenses about equal in plus lens power. Forget the cylinder. If you do your therapy correctly, you're going to use it sometimes, but mostly I forget it. And then what I find is I don't need to use it. Now, once we establish central fixation, which we will in just about every patient if we do our therapy properly, then we might prescribe that cylinder if we find it then, but only if we find it then. With an eccentrope, I like to prescribe as much plus as I can. Now, let me take back everything I just said, by the way. I do prescribe what I find if I find that lens power actually creates an orthoposition. If I can straighten the eye out with it, then I might do it. Now, with an eccentrope, I might want to get more plus power in there, because as we all know through the relationship between, excuse the expressions, accommodation and convergence, we can straighten the eye out. And so we are going to use a lot of plus therapy, trying to get more plus acceptance in the initial phase of the therapy program. We're going to use a lot of accommodative rock kind of therapy so that we can prescribe more plus power. I never use minus lenses to correct an exotrope. One of the first lectures I ever went to in this field, and the person isn't in this room. In fact, the person is dead, as most of my colleagues are. That's not funny. It's a funny feeling coming to a meeting where you used to know everybody here. And everyone was your friend, and everyone was practicing, and now you go to the meeting, and gee, you don't know anybody, and they don't know you either. It's just a very strange kind of a feeling. This person described exotropia as a focusing disease. Okay? I can't say it the way he said it. He had a southern accent, but he had a focusing disease. And if you prescribe minus lenses, as you know through the relationship between accommodation and convergence, you're going to straighten out the eye. And he would show me how it would straighten out the eye. In fact, it was one of Jim's colleagues at Berkeley. And he talked about this focusing disease. Now, you might straighten the eye out, and it might look damn good. But the pressure that it puts on that patient academically, the extra amount of accommodation that he has to use to combat that minus lens to straighten the eye out, is one of the worst things you can do. It's like trading a headache for an upset stomach, as the commercial goes. So I never use minus lenses to do that. Also, when I'm doing vision therapy, it's real important when I get fusion or binocularity, you ask the question, is the target clear? Because as you know, they can use accommodation, straighten the eyes out. You're real happy. That a boy, that a girl, you got it straight now. You're doing it right. You got pretty eyes. But the kid's flunking out in school. So we don't want to use those minus lenses to straighten the eyes out. How about prescribing bifocals for anisotrope? God, I used to hate prescribing bifocals for anisotrope. I get the eye straight, but then the mother would look at the child, or the child would look at the mother, and they look through the top part of the lenses, and through the top part of the lenses, the eye is turned in. And through the bottom part is okay, but they don't look at the kid through the bottom part. So I'm telling them the kid's a success, and they're telling me that I'm a failure. And they know I'm a fraud anyway. So, so I found that I didn't like to do that. But in looking through years and years and years of records, I found out I eventually prescribed a bifocal for practically every esotrope. So I figured, well, why wait? You know, and most of the time I prescribe it now. And the major thing in prescribing a bifocal for an esotrope is that you set the segs real high. They never look through them unless you set them real high. I never set a seg any lower than the middle of the pupil. And you might think that would really bother a lot of kids, but if you've done this for many years, as we have, it bothers the kid not at all. It might bother the mother. So we generally will use a flat top D28 kind of a bifocal, which I assume most of you do, and set it real high. How about the patient with a divergence excess? That's the kid who has about approximately a 35 exo at distance and ortho at near. And if you straighten them out at distance, you're going to create an esotrope at near. In fact, there's a lot of hospitals that will not allow their ophthalmologists, excuse the expression, to do surgery, because they're going to end up solving the problem, you know, at distance and create an esotrope, an esotrope at near. And so what we want to do, first of all, we're going to find out there's a very high relationship between accommodation and convergence. If you believe in things like ACA ratios, there's a 10 to 12 kind of an ACA ratio. And I feel these patients used to be high ESOs at near and ortho at distance. But in order to maintain their academic performance, they used a lot of negative relative convergence. This doesn't work anyway, does it? Okay. They use, I can't see anybody. The negative, all I can see is you. Who examined your eyes? Skeffy Kraskin? Is that what you said? Couldn't they have had a better combo? God, this is so much better now. You're here. And they used all this negative relative convergence. And they ended up being a divergence XX with a high exo at distance and an ortho at near. I'm never going to get to therapy, so let's talk about patching for a second here, okay? There's generally three schools of thought when it comes to occlusion. There is direct patching of the, quote, good eye. With the idea that the eye isn't being used correctly, and so you don't want him using the eye correctly when he's in your office. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. The idea of trying to build the vision up in the eye that's not being used. Well, the eye isn't being used correctly. The eye probably has an eccentric fixation. And all you're doing is embedding a lot of the bad habits that the patient has. Then there's the idea of inverse occlusion, where you occlude the bad eye. I hate words good and bad eye. God, I can't think of who it is. Somebody said to me, let's not call it good eye or bad eye. Let's call the eye that's not being used the heroic eye. That's right. That's you in Washington, D.C. And I thought that was such a good way of describing it. It's turning itself off so it's not interfering with everything. So a heroic eye would be a better way to phrase that eye. And so that way you have the patient coming into your office using their fovea, using the eye quote correctly, and then you don't want them going home and using it incorrectly. Okay? So you cover the non-normally fixating eye with inverse occlusion. A third school of thought is, Paul thinks I can't add because I sent him the outline, and I said there's 2 schools of thought, and then I started listing them, and there were 4. So, can't do everything correctly. Binasal occlusion. We use binasal occlusion mainly if we want to work with an eccentric, not an anomalous corresponder. Okay? And I'm purposely not using the term anomalous retinal corresponder. There's not time to get into all of that in 30 minutes. But it doesn't take place in the retina. But to a normal corresponder, because what we do with binasal occlusion, we force the patient to use the right eye in the right field and the left eye in the left field. So he can't do that with anomalous corresponder. The fourth school of thought would be no patching. And we've been doing this therapy for, 40, 50 years. It's heck to get old, especially when you can't move. But with 40 years, for a long period of time, and we've gotten the results that we've gotten primarily with no patching. So why aggravate the child with patching if you don't have to? If we're going to be successful in vision therapy, I find myself wanting to move. It's like maybe visualization is making my body move, but I can't move it, and it's a funny feeling. But if we're going to be successful in vision therapy, I need that patient to love me. Not like me, but love me, and to love the staff, and to love everything in that office, and every person that works in that office. They have to really look forward to coming in, and vision therapy has to be a fun kind of an experience. And I think probably most of you or all of you make it that kind of an experience, or you guys wouldn't be here. And I don't use guys in a sexual sense. Some kids will get better if you patch them. Some kids won't. It's like throwing a child into a swimming pool. And some children will learn to swim. Some will die. Okay? Some will drown. And I don't want to take that chance. So if we don't have to take that chance, and they'll end up hating me. They'll hate their parents. You're putting the patch on, the kid's yanking it off, and they think they're being a bad kid. And the kid's, being a good kid. All right, let's get into specific therapy, not specific therapy techniques, because just some general principles. Very early in my optometric career, I discovered that I was not paying attention to monocular skills. You want the kid to be binocular, so you get right into it and make him binocular. You have a pen? If I look at that pen, it's the ICBO pen, and I see it there with one eye, and I see it there with the other eye, and that's how it is with strabismics. It is unreasonable to assume that I will ever be able to get those two eyes to work together. Different information is sent through each circuit, and it gets to the brain, and it's different. They can't use both sets of information, and so they learn to suppress the vision of one eye, or parts of the vision of one eye. There's little terms that I hate, but you know what I mean. Anyway, forget that. Or if I look at that pen, and I see it there with one eye, and I see it here with the other eye, How am I going to get those two eyes to work together? It's not going to happen. Or if I look at that pen and it takes me a hundredth of a second to realize that that's an ICBO pen with one eye, and it takes me 3 seconds to realize that that's an ICBO pen with the other eye, again, we're getting different information. We're going to have to do some monocular therapy so that the patient is getting equal information with each eye. Or if I have a look at that pen, it looks this big with one eye, and with the other eye it looks only this big. Again, I'm not going to be able to get those two eyes to work together. So we are going to have to work a long time, not a long time, but we're going to have to start our therapy trying to get equal behavior and equal performance with each eye. So we're going to start out our therapy by doing lots of training, and it's in, I don't want to sell anything, but it's in the Strabismus book that OEP that has all the specific techniques for doing this. And again, I'm not trying to sell books. I'm retired now anyway. The next thing we want to get involved with, which I never did when I originally started practice, you know where I learned how to cure strabismus? My daughter Nina, who's here in the corner, okay, at about the age of 3 and a half, developed a strabismus. Now, she was a living laboratory for me. I mean, we were doing therapy on her, not therapy, we were doing preventive kinds of therapy. We were doing all the things I learned in school and all the things I learned in behavioral optometry. And she developed this esotropia of about 35 prism diopters. And the first thing I said is like, why me? But then I felt like, why not me? You know, I mean, who else? I was doing therapy at that time, but primarily therapy for kids with learning disabilities. I hadn't seen a strabismic yet, so I started doing it. And I learned from my mistakes. I learned from all the things I did wrong, and this is the result of my error. Lynn and I have 4 children. 3 of them are optometrists, and 1 married an optometrist. So you can imagine how boring our dinner parties are. So we want to get the same information coming in through each channel. And we want to do pleoptics. And again, there isn't time to go into how do you do pleoptics. Basically, pleoptics, as all of you I'm sure know, is just a method of using after images to tag the fovea, or having them look at targets that are so small that in order to get the proper information, they have to use the fovea. Now, we can't ignore traditional vision therapy when we're working with strabismics. Versions, saccades, accommodative rock. If we have one eye and we're doing versions, and he does that with one eye, and the other eye goes like that, again, it's unreasonable to assume we're going to get the 2 eyes working together. If we're going to do saccades, and one eye will go from here to here, and the other eye here, and it goes past it, and undershoots and overshoots. If they have unequal abilities, they're not going to be able to use those 2 eyes together. So we have to do that. Accommodation is usually good with one eye. It usually sucks with the other eye, with the bad, quote, bad eye. Again, I'm using that term again. Because the fovea is the only place where there is close to one-to-one hookup between cone cell and bipolar cell and ganglionic cell and optic nerve fiber. Everywhere else you get lots of cells going into one, and then lots of those cells going into one, and then lots of those cells going into another one. So it's the only place where there's a one-to-one relationship. So after we establish foveal fixation in the, quote, non-fixating eye, then we're going to have to use a lot of accommodative rock kind of therapy to get the person to be able to do that accommodative rock. If it takes a person, again, like 1/100th of a second to change focus from distance to near and back to there with one eye, and the other eye takes them 5 seconds to go from here to here to here to here, what's the point in using the other eye? There's no point in using that eye. So they're going to use the normally fixating eye. And so we have to teach the patient to use normal fixation, have normal eye movements, have normal accommodation. How about body bilaterality? From a developmental standpoint, we all know that the child learns to have control of the two halves of the body before he learns to control the two eyes together. And developmentally, a child has to have control of the large gross body movements before they learn control of the fine eye movements. A strabismic is not an eyeball problem. A strabismic is a strabismic from head to toe. And we better treat him that way, because if we don't, we're doing it at his not interest and his peril. People think we're crazy. You know, they come in the office and they see things like balance boards and walking rails and trampolines. What in the world are we doing? Well, what we're doing is a major step in trying to cure that strabismus. Eliminating suppression used to take a long time. It doesn't take a long time anymore. Since the advent, and I don't even know who introduced this, of flashing lights, of lights flashing at the alpha rhythm, which is approximately 10 cycles per second. And it takes time to make an adaptation. It takes time to make a suppression. So the light comes on, and the child has to suppress that light, and because it's off, and then it comes back on again, and it's off, and he has to do it back on again. And it's like, you know, after a while, it's like, oh shit, I can't do that. Excuse my scientific language. Learned that at Berkeley. And so they just can't do it. And so whenever we get a suppression, we walk around with a strobe light, okay, and we'll shine that strobe light on the target that's being suppressed, or we'll shine that strobe light into the eye that is being suppressed, okay? So a strobe light is one of the most useful instruments that we have. Now, once we eliminate suppression, or weaken it, or just make it weaker, one of the most critical periods in the therapy program is lots of monocular therapy in a binocular field. In other words, one eye is being stimulated while both eyes are open, rather than patching one eye and stimulating the other eye. For example, a single slide of a split vectogram. And then we'll do simultaneous vision. And then simultaneous vision with the patient making an attempt to control his two eyes together. I can't see what's on the screen, but for example, you would have a green square, okay, and a red circle. Patient wearing anaglyphic lenses, and let's say we have the red lens over the eye that sees the circle, the green lens over the eye that sees the square. Now, let's not get into arguments of which eye sees which. We're talking of light, not reflected colors. We'll ask the patient, what do you see? And, of course, what we'd like him to see is the red circle inside the green square. Now, if that patient, let's say, for example, is a right esotrope, what he's going to see is the green square here and the red circle over here outside of the square. So now we're going to ask him, now what is it you're going to have to do to put the red circle inside the green square? Now, one of the hardest things to do is to get the patient to straighten his eyes out. You know, turn that eye out or turn that eye in. But one of the easiest things to do is to get the patient to look closer or to look further. So we project these targets onto a translucent screen, and we teach the patient to look further away than the screen. Now, if he looks further away in the screen, the circle is going to go inside the square. Okay? If he looks closer, he can get the circle to move on the other side of the square. So we just ask him, let's assume he's able to do that. And most patients are able to do that. And we'll ask him, what do your eyes feel like now that you have the red circle inside the green square? Now, they might give you all sorts of crazy answers. They might say, it seems like the red circle, that my right eye is over by my right ear. I don't care what they tell me. I want them to remember that. What does it feel like now that your eyes are straight? Okay? And again, that sounds like a hard thing to do, but I'd say you're able to do that in 70, 80% of your patients. And we'll tell little girls, like, make pretty eyes. And that means that they look further away, okay? Or make your eyes straight, you know, whatever phrase seems to work, so that they can get themselves to know that if they look further away or look closer to them, they're going to be able to move that eye in or out. We want to use a lot of physiological diplopia. The best physiological diplopia method there is, I think, is a Brock string, because that's just a series of physiological diplopias. How does a person know where they're looking? If I say, you know, look at that, how do you know you're not looking here, you're not looking there? So we want to use every technique we can possibly think of to provide the patient with feedback. Now, isn't that the basic criteria or method we're using in all our therapy procedures? Have the patient know what their visual system is doing rather than you telling them. Now, at this point in time, we want to see if the fusion reflex exists. Now, most people at optometric college say there's no such thing as a fusion reflex. What I'm talking about with a fusion reflex is, like, let's say, for example, you're doing a adduction test and you're adding rotary prism, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you know, at a time. Now, when you do that, there is an increase in tonus of the extraocular muscles to fixate that target so it remains single. It only becomes and that's an involuntary movement. Now, it only becomes voluntary when a patient starts experiencing diplopia, and then he makes a voluntary movement to get those two images together. And so we want to find if this reflex exists. In some people, it doesn't exist. So we'll create fusion, or we'll start out probably with luster. Luster is where there's all ground and no figure. Let's say we have a wall that's red and a wall that's green, which is just created by a blank wall without any texture to it. And so it looks like they're looking at the red through the green or the green through the red. And once we create that luster, we'll add 1 or 2 prism diopters and see if they can maintain that luster. So we'll put 2 prism diopters, you know, here, base out, there's base in, base out, it's base in, and see if they have that fusion reflex. Because you can't determine that until you've done all the other things that we just got through talking about. And if they have the fusion reflex, we're going to get them to use their 2 eyes together. Now, if we do the preceding steps, the rest of the vision therapy is what you all know, what all you've been taught in school. Is that a timing you're standing up with? How much time do I have? 5 minutes? Okay. All right. I will rush. Because the rest of the therapy is easy. Okay. The rest of it is a regular therapy that we learned in school. So there's nothing new. But when we precede that by all the other things that we just got through talking about, because years ago we used to rush right into the binocular phase. But we precede it now by creating equal monocular skills, probably the most important part. Body bilaterality, the proper elimination of suppression, teach him how to posture his own eyes, then the binocular phase becomes very easy. Now, one of the major differences from the classical approach is that we do not use instruments in the initial phase of therapy. I hate instruments. They say, I'm not getting into that. There are many disadvantages of using instruments. One, we're talking about an artificial space world. This is optical infinity. He knows it's not optical infinity. We're only giving fusional experiences in the primary position, right here. In real life, the eyes are rarely in the primary position. Okay, they're here, they're here, they're here. When you're looking right here, you have a very symmetrical demand of convergence. When you're looking over here, you have to abduct with the right eye, you have to adduct with the left eye, you have to adduct more, and you have to abduct. It's a very asymmetrical thing. And we better provide experience for the patients in all of those positions of gaze if we are going to be successful. We have to structure the therapy situation as close to real life as we possibly can. So we use instruments last to fine-tune the therapy program. So we can have the patient have binocularity when what he sees is different from what he knows it to be. What he sees is different than what he knows it to be. And then if he can get therapy, get binocularity under those situations, then he has it. We want to make therapy as close to real life as we possibly can, so we provide activities which are close to real life. We provide fusional experiences in jump amounts rather than gradual amounts. In real life, we're never going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You know, we're looking here, we're looking there, we're looking here, we're looking there. We're focusing at different distances. We're not trying to build up muscle strength. We all know that the muscles of the eyes are like 100 times stronger than they really need to be. We're trying to build up degrees of freedom between convergence and accommodation. Well, that will allow the patient to maintain binocularity under stress. So consequently, when we add prism, we're asking questions to the patient relative to blur. And when we're adding spherical lenses, we're asking the patient's questions relative to singleness or diplopia. And next, after the importance of those findings, comes the recovery finding, because the recovery finding is a measure of the quality of the binocularity. So, to conclude, surgery, if you look all the research, shows a cure rate, a functional cure rate of 11%. Vision therapy has shown a cure rate of 73%. So we, those of us in this room, are the only real hope that these patients have. Thank you very much.
Great.
God. Now, you're going to really make me cry. I'm much more used to a sitting ovation. But thank you for your attention. Thank you for your love.
Okay. So what I want to do now is turn the podium back to Don Getz to introduce our Kraskin Memorial Lecture. So let's, a quiet hush came over the crowd.
Yeah, I'll just do it. No, I'll tell you what. I'm still emotionally on a high or a low, I don't know how you call it, over that standing ovation. One of the things about not being in practice anymore is I don't feel important anymore. You know, I used to feel real important. And now I don't anymore, and that kind of made me feel important again. So I thank you very much. You might wonder why in the world I was selected to introduce Bob Kraskin. I'm sorry, what? I still didn't hear that. Oh, no. I thought it was just because I outlived him.
I whispered different.
If any of you have been to meetings where Bob and I were present and lecturing together, you would think we hated each other. We would argue over concepts, all during the presentations, and the young students who were there were always amazed. Then we went out to dinner together, and how could people who differed so much do that? But Bob was so loved by me. He was definitely my optometric best friend. As families, we were best friends. We would travel together, and I don't know of anyone that I respect more than I respect Bob Kraskin. He's known for a lot of things. Many of you know that Lucy Johnson, President Johnson's daughter, I don't know, was a disciple of him. She was in school and was failing in school and had vision therapy and became an A student in school. She then became a vision therapist for Bob Kraskin. She started an organization called Volunteers for Vision, of which she was chairman of, and it's like COVD now is making vision therapy visible. I'm not sure that's the exact name, but she probably did more than anything as a result of Bob's influence to make vision therapy visible. Jim talked about Socrates and using the Socratic method to teach people. Bob did that. When someone wanted information, he wouldn't just give it to them. He would ask them questions, and questions which made people think. Many of you don't know it, but Bob was a jazz trumpeter. And when he asked Marion to marry him, she said, "The only way I'm going to marry you is if you give up that damn jazz trumpet." And so if it weren't for Marion, we'd probably be here, celebrating Louis Armstrong. Bob was one of the most modest people you have ever met. He contributed so much to our profession. Never took credit for it. Like all the things that I've heard about Bob, I'm not even sure Bob said them. I heard them from Bob, but they might have come from Skeffington or Getman or the people of that era who produced so much. But he just didn't take credit. He was kind to everybody. He was imposing. He had, if you can see that the picture, he's got the bald head with a little stupid tuft of hair that goes out, and he just kind of looked mean. But no way was he mean. He was just really a kind person. He loved Las Vegas. Lynn and I would meet them, Marion and Bob, in Las Vegas a couple of times a year. And you think he's a big gambler. His game was bingo. You could picture that. We went one time, and I literally developed a bingo elbow. They go B14, G54, and I went into abject pain with my elbow. He had a system for everything. He had a system for vision therapy. And he had a system for roulette. He did everything the same way. We would go to dinner. He'd order the same meal every night. He never took credit for himself, although he educated others so much. He had people talking to you. I had an influence. I don't think I had any influence compared to Bob's influence. Bob has contributed to so many other people, and people who have carried on with lecturing. Bob was a big influence. Bob Sannett, a big influence. They're carrying on the teachings of Bob Kraskin, so it goes on and on. He chairmaned the KISS meeting, the meeting in Washington, D.C. every January for like 30 years. And during this meeting, he had a big impact on other people. He would play bridge with Lyndon and Lady Bird. Was very close to them. So rather than presenting a vitae, which graduated from here and was chairman of this, I'd like to give a couple quotes from Bob because they were very influential on my life. He defined vision, the deriving of meaning and the direction of action. The direction of action. Is that good? Driving of meaning and the direction of action as a product of the processing of information triggered by a selected band of radiant energy. But I love the directing of action part of vision. He wrote great things about lenses and how they modified behavior. Not how they corrected refractive error, but how they modified behavior. He wrote OEP papers on vision training and lens power in action. His life was committed to the exploration of new concepts and new applications of the behavioral vision model. He recognized that the vision process is developed and that it can be enhanced, also that it can be protected, controlled, and maintained. Basic tenets of behavioral vision. In Lens Power in Action, he wrote about the where, when, and how lenses can be used for purposes other than visual compensation. The rest of optometry looks at or compensating for some vision problem. I don't have any slides with this, by the way. The optometrist, he says, does not correct the refractive error. He compensates for the refractive error. The patient's still a myope behind the lenses. Lens power in action refers to the power of a lens to alter behavior. He makes a big difference, and I wish medicine would make this difference now, between prevention and early identification. Every time you hear medicine talk about prevention, they're really talking about early identification so they can get in there and do their shtick. He invented stress point retinoscopy, which is the method of determining the optimal lens for near point, not the optical infinity, whatever that is. He would offer his patients 3 alternatives of care after he evaluated them: good, better, and best. He would say with the good, if all I know today was known 3 generations ago, all I'd be able to offer you is this first method, which is basically compensatory lenses. About 10% of his patients selected the compensatory care, which he qualified as good. Vision therapy is the third alternative, and he offered it to every patient. He offered the patient the opportunity to have vision therapy. And given the opportunity, the vast majority of patients would select the vision therapy because it would be stupid to just select the minimal amount of care, which is what everyone else had offered them in the past as the only approach. No, there's another page. Okay? He said a lens does nothing to a person, but a person can do much with a lens. Vision is the product of a very simple eye and a most complex brain. Aren't these wonderful thoughts? He said he's never known an optometrist to understand the behavioral concept and go ahead and practice the old-fashioned way. And this is probably one of my favorite quotes. He says, if the theory is repeated often enough, it takes on the guise of a fact. Isn't that so true? There's so many theories that are taught as facts in our schools and by so many lecturers. Bob was a great man with a tender soul. There was a decency and a professionalism about him. He was the most considerate, the most thoughtful, the most courteous, the most dignified, the kindest man that I have ever met. He was a class act all the way. The world would be a better place if more people were like Bob Kraskin. I have some slides of Bob. I can't see them from here very well because I can't turn my head. Pardon? I can't hear what you said.
Go right into the net thing.
Okay, can you just show them? Oh, you've done it? All right, you're ahead of me. So these are Bob's. They don't need any narration. Just pictures of Bob receiving the Skeffington Award and being with Marion on the Lincoln Steps, and you can see this is for those of you who have never seen A.M. Skeffington. There he is with Bob Kraskin. It's hard for me to realize that so many people in this room are so young that they never met and don't know people like Bob Kraskin and A.M. Skeffington. It's real appropriate that Dr. Nat Flax has been selected to present the Kraskin Memorial Lecture. Bob had a great respect for Nat. Nat had a great respect for Bob. And they used the same Socratic method in asking questions. I love when someone asks them a question and they ask them questions back so that they can really learn on their own. And it's just a wonderful approach to learning. Both Bob, and Nat came at things very differently. And in listening to them, you might think they had totally different viewpoints on vision. At one point, Nat challenged Bob to come to Bob's office and discuss vision training. And Nat made a ground rule. The ground rule is that no theory was to be discussed. All they would discuss and observe was what they both did, not the way they explained it, but what they both did. And what they discovered, they both did things the same way. It was really amazing to them. And there was an incredible amount of common ground between Nat and Bob. When optometrists heard them lecture, they tended to hear differences more than similarities. And we tend to do that when we listen to people. And it was hard to believe that they really were very good friends, Bob and Nat. Many of you who have known both of them may think that Nat was not a logical choice to present the Kraskin lecture because they differed so much philosophically. Part of Nat's career was devoted to the study of dyslexia and to the use of all the false labels that misdiagnose vision and learning problems. For example, when Nat was young, believe it or not, Nat dreamed of becoming an NBA basketball player. We were looking for him before the lecture, and he's so short we couldn't find him. But that's what he dreamed of. But like things he studied, he was given a label also. He was given the false label of basketball congenitus. And you can sort of see why. Which was found in a very obscure IDA code book and given a number, like dyslexia is given a number. Actually, his only problem was that he was vertically challenged. And in reality, was a highly adapted 6'4" person. And he tells me as he gets older, he keeps on adapting, getting shorter every year. And I certainly can relate to that. But seriously, I know of no one in optometry who integrates academic skills and clinical skills better than Dr. Nat Flax.